This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Big show on tap. We are rocking and rolling with basically 2 weeks, maybe less than 2.5 weeks left of the NBA regular season to play. A lot of action taking place, and some interesting things are now going to come to fruition. Positions can be compromised, not just in the Eastern Conference, but also in the Western Conference. And so we're going to break it down, and then we have got a absolutely great guest on board for some really good conversation and talk that we just can't wait to have you listen to. So I'm going to roll out the red carpet for my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, my brother from another mother, Warren Shaw, www.shawsports.net. What's good, my brother? How are we feeling this weekend?
Feeling great, man. Thank you for asking. Salute to all the fans and listeners of NBA Baseline. As you alluded to, man, we're keeping it rolling here. Final 2 weeks of the NBA season coming down to the wire. Got a lot of great discussion, but an amazing guest with an amazing story that I think is going to resonate with all of our listeners.
Yeah, in a little bit, we are going to have our man, slam dunk champion, really all-around great guy. More importantly, a man with a true story to tell, Kenny Dobbs, who is fresh off of a absolute fabulous weekend. He's chilling in Arizona. That's where the warmth is at. I wish I was in Arizona right about now, brother. But he is out there just fresh off of the new release of his movie, Slamma Jamma, directed by Timothy Shea. So he has been able to break off a little bit of time from his schedule to talk to us. We can't wait. We got some Q&A to roll with him on, so we want to share it with you. And then in our segment of the breakdown, hey, just because we talked about the Eastern Conference doesn't mean that we don't believe in equilibrium. So, of course, we have to talk about that 8th seed in the Western Conference. It looks like it could be a 2-horse race between the Portland Trailblazers and the Denver Nuggets. Find out from my man Shaw and myself who we think has the inside track to pulling off the 8th seed. So really good stuff on board. We definitely appreciate you and yours tuning into the Baseline NBA podcast. As always, get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. We always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, and iHeartRadio. So we encourage you to download any one of those platforms. Also available on Google Music and the Roku channel. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things NBA. Shout outs to our people Freeman and Fox, the Sports Brothers. Big shout outs to our people, the NBA Lead, and also 16 Wins a Ring, one of the premier websites that covers and discusses the NBA. You want good content? You want the real? Go to 16 Wins a Ring. The Baseline NBA podcast is also exclusively featured there as well, too. So let's not waste any time. You know how we roll. You know how we do. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
Put the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cali, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week on the breakdown, we're going to dig right into the Western Conference, the race for that 8th seed. And unlike what we're seeing right now in the Eastern Conference, because in our show last week, we kind of broke down how there are 5 teams in the East, respectively, all gunning for the 6th, 7th, and 8th seeds. And while that chase is tight, you're more enamored by the fact that there's more teams and more at stake to play. That every single game being played up until the end of the season, there can certainly be an effect where one team can be up and easily can get knocked down. Anyone suffering a significant losing streak this deep into the regular season may fall susceptible to taking themselves out of the playoff picture. During the trade deadline, the Western Conference, some significant moves were made from the bottom tier teams. Teams like the Dallas Mavericks, the New Orleans Pelicans with their blockbuster trade, the Denver Nuggets in making a move to get Mason Plumlee. And we all probably thought that maybe the Western Conference would have a greater fight coming towards the end for whoever's going to take possibly that 7th and 8th seed. But look, as we get down to the stretch, it looks like this is going to be a 2-team chase. And Shaw, when you look at how the Western Conference is certainly played up, despite the big moves that happened primarily in the Western Conference with the New Orleans Pelicans and with the Denver Nuggets and even respectively with the Portland Trailblazers involved because they gave up Mason Plumlee and got Joseph Nurkic. It just seems like the two best teams, again, Northwest Division, position themselves to make a run for that 8th seed.
100% correct, my dude. I think it's really funny when you talk about the outset of the set here. You began with the conversations about the trade deadline. And the first thing that you noticed correctly was, wow, two teams that are basically fighting each other for a playoff spot made a trade in terms of trading some of their big guys, if you will. Now, Nurkic was not playing in Denver. He had been kind of out of the rotation as Jokic had really taken the lead role over there. And now he comes over to Portland. It's been a godsend for them, really, and has really helped them make this great push towards the end, but they're still chasing Denver. And Plumlee's played relatively well too in his role over with the Nuggets. But it is very interesting to see that these two teams, especially in the case of Portland, because everybody would have thought or everybody predicted Portland to be a lot better than they were, not fighting for an 8th seed. Everyone thought they could be winning the Northwest Division, or at least right up there with Utah, trying to capture some sort of maybe home court advantage in the first round. And here they are struggling to get in. Denver's spot right now is a little bit more expected, if you will. All right, well, they're young. They got this weird mix of veterans and young guys. What do they really stand? Them fighting for the 8th seed makes a little bit more sense. But there's also, a couple other teams here at the bottom of this race too, that particularly one in particular that can play spoiler for them. But I definitely feel like the New Orleans Pelicans and Dallas Mavericks and those teams, the Minnesota Timberwolves, they pretty much etched themselves out of this conversation for now. It really is a 2-team race, as you alluded to.
How disappointed are you, Shaw, with reference to the New Orleans Pelicans? Look, when we talked about this trade as it being a blockbuster trade, I thought it was blockbuster in the sense of the controversy, the hype, and really more the way that the organization handled this particular trade with reference to Boogie Cousins. And it's so amazing because I think maybe to other people, whether you're a fan, maybe to some of the inside analysts and critics and writers, some of our peoples from the 16 Wins a Ring website, maybe they thought that this type of move to bring a dynamic of Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins together on a basketball team might actually be the trigger effect to suddenly catapult the New Orleans Pelicans to being one of those teams that you would hope to see in the playoffs and possibly taking on a Golden State Warriors, maybe a San Antonio Spurs in the first round, just to see if whether or not these two phenomenal front court players can be the backbone and backbreakers in that Western Conference playoff picture. But I think in realistic terms, though, you look at this basketball team and you never felt or got the sense that they would still have enough in the second half after that trade deadline to even do enough to find themselves playing that 8th seed for the Western Conference playoff picture.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it was a long shot. Really, there's like, you know what? We have a chance to get Cousins. Maybe we get in the playoffs this year and we can be a scary 8th seed to whoever ends up being number 1, most likely Golden State. But if San Antonio were to catch them, one way or the other. I keep saying, I was asked this question, on another show that one of our friends over in Memphis, Josh from Talkback Live said, well, is this trade a flop? And that was basically after the first week when they had gone like 0-4 with Cousins in the lineup, and they finally their first one came with Cousins not on the lineup, I guess, because of the suspension. And I said they made this move, like I said, as a long shot for this year, but more for what they think they can do in the upcoming seasons. New Orleans is in the situation of like, listen, they have 2 of the top 5 big men in the league, and then probably 2 of the top 10 players in the league, with Anthony Davis and Cousins on the same roster. And they're looking to see how a full summer, full training camp, getting the correct pieces around them in the off season, what they're going to be able to do next year. And no matter what happens, I think this is really something that they are looking forward to for the future. They think they can re-sign Cousins, but if for some reason it weren't to work out next year, they don't make the playoffs or they're not even competitive one way or the other, then I don't know that they are going to be able to re-sign Boogie. I know that's the sentiment right now. New Orleans is close to Alabama, where he's from, and all of that, and he and Anthony Davis can be a dynamic duo for X amount of years to come. But if they don't get it together next year, there's going to be some problems here. But I'm not as bullish on them making the playoffs this year, and I'm not on down as that. It doesn't bother me as much as it does some other teams or other players, or sorry, other analysts out there. I just don't think they had a real shot at making it this year to begin with.
Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast, our segment of the breakdown as we talk about the Western Conference, the chase for the 8th seed, the Portland Trailblazers, Denver Nuggets, basically a game within a game's distance. Whoever of these two teams really are the only ones that have what it takes down the stretch right now to position themselves to get that 8th spot. We talk about teams like the New Orleans Pelicans and the Dallas Mavericks, Shaw. Let me ask you this question real quick. Who had instantly upgraded themselves to project further success and ultimately could have a factor with the outcome between the Portland Trailblazers and the Denver Nuggets in this final stretch of games between either the Dallas Mavericks, the New Orleans Pelicans, or the Sacramento Kings?
Well, I think the question, if in terms of who has the greatest impact, the most impactful player was obviously Cousins going to New Orleans. I think the best fit easily, excuse me, was Noel going to Dallas. And what the Mavericks wanted to do. We've talked so much about that, in the post-trade deadline conversations in terms of Noel being the type of player that Carlisle likes and that Carlisle can use. The ironic thing about that to me is I don't know that that's exactly happened. Noel, I guess, has been a little bit banged up, since getting over there as well. But I thought, okay, it was going to be a plug and play. You start at center now, and that's a done deal. He started sometimes, he come off the bench other times, and that to me is a little bit confusing. But Dallas has just regressed some since their supposed turnaround, sometime in January. They haven't been able to remain consistent, and we just talked about New Orleans, Sacramento. Listen, they're nothing to be considered about in any way, the shape of the conversation. We'll have to go through the rest of the schedule here to kind of figure out where Sacramento plays into trying to play spoiler for some of these teams out there. But I don't think they have the guns and the horses out there to really do a whole lot.
All right, so let's go ahead and shift our focus to these two teams, the Portland Trailblazers, Denver Nuggets, and we talked about how the trade deadline. Basically, it is just amazing that these guys were the ones who actually traded amongst each other when both of these teams were playing for that 8th seed in the Western Conference. I don't know how far they were from, say, the 7th seed, but a safe assumption could have been made that the Portland Trailblazers was definitely not the 8th seed at the time. The Denver Nuggets were. And somehow they figured out a way to move Mason Plumlee from Portland and move Joseph Nurkic from Denver to each other's respective teams. And both of them have actually been great contributors. They're 7-3 over their last 10 games as we record this podcast, Shaw. To me, realistically, I'm trying to say to myself, all right, where is it or who is it that's going to maximize or get the best out of the deal that's been made? Because ultimately, it looks like it's going to come down to the final game of the season before we can truly determine whose impact player is the one that's going to get them over the finish line.
Well, to me, there's no question in terms of who's benefited from the trade more. I think it's definitely Portland, because to me they were dead in the water. And there's been a lot of conversation also about maybe we've overlooked Damian Lillard, especially since the All-Star break. He's been very good since the break, and we all know that he gets a lot of praise and claim and things like that of that nature. But I felt like
Lillard has been balling. Especially ever since March the 12th. Damian Lillard has been balling. 39, 29, 36, 27, 49 in that game against the Miami Heat, 31, 30. I mean, McCollum finally got a little bit of shine, dropping 32 the other night in a big win against the Minnesota Timberwolves. But to your point, Shaw, yes, since basically the beginning of March, Damian Lillard has been playing like a beast.
Right. And I think a lot of that is also helped by the fact that they have somebody who defenses need to respect on the interior with Nurkic. Nurkic, since coming to Portland, is 14 and 10 a game, pretty much. 2 blocks and couple assists, couple steals. He's really doing a lot for them and giving them a great presence inside, which now doesn't allow the defenses to just suck in and double and collapse on McCollum and Lillard out there. So for me, Nurkic just had the biggest impact and has changed Portland's trajectory immensely. Plumlee has been, he's going to do what he does. I think he's 9.7 rebounds since being in there. Still getting 3 assists a game. Great playmaker at that. But now they have 2 great playmakers at the big positions in terms of Jokic and Plumlee in Denver. When it comes down to who's going to get in, though, to me, I feel like Denver's still more cohesive in terms of, and they've been more consistent. And that's a very, very arbitrary word to use for a team that's under 500. But I feel like they have more of an identity of what they're trying to do. Portland has kind of fallen into this identity since Nurkic, and it might be enough to get them in. But if I was hedging a bet, I would still go with Denver.
All right. Well, I can certainly understand where you're coming from. Big game coming up March the 28th, where the Portland Trailblazers take on the Denver Nuggets. Now, it's not big in the sense that should the Portland Trailblazers lose that basketball game, that they have suddenly damaged their opportunities to take that 8th seed. But I will say, Shaw, that their path to the 8th seed does not get easy in the month of April. Because after the Phoenix Suns, they still wind up playing the Minnesota Timberwolves. They'll play the Utah Jazz 2 more times. I'm sorry, they play the Timberwolves twice. They'll play the Utah Jazz twice. And then they end off playing the San Antonio Spurs and the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, maybe to some people, you might look at those last 2 games as, well, the San Antonio Spurs and Greg Popovich will probably figure out a way to rest Kawhi, rest Paul Gasol, rest LaMarcus Aldridge. And then New Orleans, clearly they're going to go, they're going to throw their big guns out there. And there's no question the Pelicans will play spoiler amongst these teams between the Denver Nuggets and the Portland Trailblazers. But I think the core of the Portland Trailblazers' opportunity to get in will have to be them doing well in the beginning of those beginning games in the month of April, because those are so critical. Not only are they divisional games, but they're games that ultimately you have played against them and they know you as equally better than all the rest of the teams in the Western Conference.
Well, yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. That game against the Nuggets is obviously going to be huge. They could be playing basically for that 8th seed right then and there, determining some sort of tiebreaker. But you're right. It's very tough for them in Portland, having Houston on that schedule, and Houston is not resting anybody. They're going out there, even though they're pretty much assured and locked into that 3 seed. They're not resting people, so Portland's going to have to bring it against them. Phoenix has been troublesome for some teams. They played a little bit better, but there's definitely youth movement there, so that's a must win that they have to have. And then you said they have to play the Jazz and Timberwolves twice. Listen, Tom Thibodeau is not one of those guys who's going to rest his players and say, all right, you go ahead and you guys can go ahead and have this one. The T-Wolves, we didn't include them in this conversation. I guess they're not mathematically eliminated yet, but they're not resting people and they're not taking any games off. All those guys are young. 2 games versus Minnesota, 1 at home and one in Mini. That's not going to be easy for Portland. So I'm very concerned about their prospects coming down the line, and Utah twice as well too, and they're fighting for a 4 seed and trying not to slip down to maybe as far as 7. So Utah is going to be in the thick of this as well. There's no rest for the Portland Trailblazers trying down the stretch of these final games.
You got to give kudos to Adam Silver and the committee, because while we were questioning the way that they had the scheduling set up for the Eastern Conference teams that we were talking about last week, where they have a couple of games where they're actually playing on the road out in the Western Coast, this is what we were talking about. Teams that are coming down the stretch and there are opportunities where they should be playing within their own conferences, and these games are actually going to matter. Now, look, we would be talking about it if we said, the Portland Trailblazers were 5 games above 500 and they're playing against, the worst teams in the Western Conference. I mean, we're not talking about like this is a flex schedule. But what I am saying is that we have seen at certain points throughout the years where the way that the schedules were set up, it almost guarantees teams taking themselves out of the playoff picture, because they're playing against teams that really they have no business playing against, interconference games and things of that nature. And I think it takes away from the dramatization of why these games now should really matter, especially if you're playing against teams that are against you in your own division that can actually affect the way that you are actually playing yourself into the playoffs.
Right. And it's just ironic how the schedule kind of falls and plays itself out, if you will. And when you take Denver's case, if you will, like you alluded to it, they have 3 games versus the Pelicans, which just seems absurd to play a team 3 times within a month. As we're recording, because we're recording this on a Sunday, they'll play today and then they'll play 2 more times after that. But that's a little bit quirky to me. You don't really see that at this stage of the NBA schedule. But overall, I like Denver's chances. They have some road games that they're really going to have to win, and especially going against a tough Miami team, in South Beach down there. Like, that's going to be a huge game for them. And then they have to play Oklahoma City twice too, who we've alluded to. They're right in the midst of that same race between 4 and 7, and they're going to be trying to get a higher seed. So no rest for the weary for any of these playoff teams, and that's what's going to make the final month or whatever it is we have left. I guess with 3 weeks left that we have in this NBA season, it's going to make it so exciting, man.
Definitely. All right, so we've went ahead, we've broken it down. Well, let me ask you this question, Shaw. Who are going to be your X factor players to carry them down the stretch for the Denver Nuggets and for the Portland Trailblazers?
Well, I think that's a great question because Denver, they've been shuffling people in and out because of injuries. I think if they can continue to get Wilson Chandler and Danilo Gallinari on the court and healthy, that really is their X factors. It's health. Those guys need to play and need to be on the court on a regular basis. They've just pretty much excommunicated Emmanuel Mudiay. Doesn't really see the court. They're going with the veteran guy Jameer Nelson to try to help them lead them into the playoffs. And I think that's the right move for them. And we'll see what happens with Mudiay in the summer. But those two guys, Gallinari and Chandler, are huge.
And it's funny, Ashley Douglas. Our girl Ashley Douglas, she called it. She was not enamored with Emmanuel Mudiay, and she felt like something had to change. They had to shake something up in order to give the Denver Nuggets, and I think the Denver fans who've suffered through this, mediocrity and less than average type play, they had to do something to give fans, a realistic expectation that they are about winning basketball games, and it's not just, another means of going through a regular season of the NBA Combine with some of these young guys who just still don't know how they still don't get it. It hasn't clicked for them to understand the ramifications, the magnitude of playing, in the big time, in the NBA.
Yeah, no, it's true. And then, switching over to Portland, they have a million X factors. I really do feel like they have to find one of these three guys to come up and be consistent and be a consistent source of points and even defense at times, to get out there. And that's between Mo Harkless, Al-Farouq Aminu, and now they got Evan Turner back. One of those three guys just needs to be, cool. I can be, an option for you, and you don't have to worry about me. I'm going to be consistent on a regular night basis. They have McCollum, they have Lillard, they obviously have Nurkic now, who's been playing great. But to me, that other guy who needs to kind of do the intangibles and be a playmaker when necessary, to hit a big three when necessary, that has been really much in flux. And Stotts has had a hard time kind of getting the rotation together, and they've also had injuries. Minu's been injured. Turner, like I said, just came back, and Harkless has just been up and down for the entire NBA season. So one of those three guys has to step up. What do you think, though? Who's your X factor for those two teams?
Well, to me, the X factor for the Denver Nuggets, I really think it's going to wind up coming down to the play of Danilo Gallinari. It's funny. When he's with Jameer Nelson, he actually plays better. This basketball team collectively can play better. Guys like Gary Harris, Wilson Chandler, they all can make significant contributions. And things can look good enough for the Denver Nuggets to probably hold. I'm a little leery about that on the road schedule, where they play basically 5 of their last 7 games on the road in the month of April.
Tough.
It's just
That's
not
really
easy
tough.
at all. One of which is in Miami. Then you travel all the way to New Orleans 2 days later, like that. And then you have a back-to-back with the Pelicans and then the Houston Rockets, right? Who I'm sure the Houston Rockets are certainly going to be playing for something significant, right? James Harden, MVP, Houston Rockets continuing to push, the gamut to try and see if they can sneak in and grab that second seed if possible. This is tough, man. It's really tough. I gotta say that if it comes down to firepower, the Portland Trailblazers have it. The guys are seasoned. Damian Lillard has put this basketball team into the playoffs, 3 years in a row already? It's tough, man. And if you're going to get the kind of contributions from Nurkic like you're getting right now, I feel like he can have more of instant impact when there are games where you can't stop Lillard and McCollum, or you know what I'm saying, or if you stop one of the two, Nurkic has got enough firepower that it masks the struggles that Terry Stotts has been finding flip-flopping between Aminu and Harkless. I really think that it's going to be the Portland Trailblazers that winds up taking this. But where it becomes key, Shaw, is to your point. It comes down to that game against the Denver Nuggets on the 28th. That, to me, might be the actual critical tipping point, because then we'll see who's more confident to make the final run, the Portland Trailblazers or the Denver Nuggets in the month of April.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those games that I feel like, NBA TV, I don't know and then maybe they did. I haven't looked at the schedule. Maybe they picked it up as their Tuesday night game of the week, if you will, because that really is something that's going to be very important.
It won't be fan night TV by NBA TV, just simply purely because of the politics, even though I think it should be automatic. If you want people to really appreciate the magnitude and playoff atmosphere basketball, that game is the game that needs to be televised, because either one of these teams are ultimately going to have to play the number 1 seed, being the Golden State Warriors. You're not going to tell me you're just going to rely on the Warriors and the Warriors playing against whoever they play for to up the ante. I think this would have been a great opportunity for NBA fans to appreciate how some of these smaller market teams are actually making a concerted effort to push their way into the playoffs.
Right. And hopefully they make some sort of pivot on it if they haven't already. Like I said, I don't have the TV schedule kind of in front of me for what's going on that evening, but that to me definitely would seem like the game to watch. And luckily, hey, I think we both have access to a chance to watch League Pass. So that's where my focus will be on this Tuesday evening, as we record ahead of that game. I'm very anxious to see how they play and see what that is. Nurkic going back up against his old team, Plumlee, there's any hard feelings, all of that. There's all those like many little storylines, but again, it really boils down to, this could really determine in one way or the other who's going to get the 8 seed. But again, I kind of agree with you even a little bit more to your earlier point too, that with all these road games, and it makes me leery of Denver, but I'm not going to go back on my word. I think if they can get maybe even 3 of those games or 4 of those games one way or the other on the road, it builds so much character for them. So again, it's a tall order, but they're winnable games. Playing at New Orleans, playing at Charlotte. I mean, those are winnable games. And Miami's going to obviously be a little bit tougher to get, but obviously they have to get the one against Portland and then playing against at Dallas too. I think if they can get some of those games there, they'll be just fine and build enough character and enough equity to get into the playoffs.
All right, well, there you have it, man. The race for number 8, down to 2 teams basically in the Western Conference. But make no mistake about it, the New Orleans Pelicans are definitely at the heart of shaking things up, either for the Denver Nuggets or for the Portland Trailblazers. I think it just comes down to who wants it more. The Portland Trailblazers have shown over the last couple of years they have definitely wanted it, and are definitely one of those teams that you probably, if you're one of the top seeds in the Western Conference, you really don't want to see guys like Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum in there. And now with this new added member in Joseph Nurkic, that this is a basketball team that could actually be, a formidable team. Will they beat the Warriors or will they beat the Spurs? No, I mean, nobody's making that. But I do think that when it comes to the type of guard play that people have been, kind of enamored by over the last couple of years, they will not disappoint. But I do definitely like the story of the Denver Nuggets. We hope that either one of these teams will be a proper representation for what has really been a great race down the stretch of regular season basketball to get into the Western Conference playoffs. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week on The Drop, we had an opportunity to talk with one of the more charismatic ballers in the game right now, slam dunk champion, and now movie star, upcoming movie Slamma Jamma, which has just been recently released nationwide, directed by Tim Shea, one of the great movies already for 2018. Our man Kenny Dobbs had a moment in transition to talk with us about the impact of this movie, his life, and what this all means, the magnitude of it all, and how it can apply to the upcoming youth in today's society. Check it out. A special guest on board. He is a part of the newly released movie that's out now called Slamma Jamma, directed by Timothy Shea. And the storyline of this movie actually centers around our man. He is a slam dunk phenomenon, and he is building up momentum, and this movie just lends more to it. Our man, Kenny Dobbs. Kenny, thanks for joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, man.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me, man. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Kenny, man, not a lot of people really understand the magnitude of what it takes, not just to be the entity, the athlete that you currently are right now, but everything that you've done to get yourself to this particular point. Talk a little bit about how important it was to have this movie come out, how it correlates to your lifeline, to your storyline, and being where you are.
I got kicked out of my home at 15 years old. I began making a lot more negative choices. Now I'm using drugs, selling drugs, and now without having my parents there to tell me really what to do, I dropped out of high school at 15 as well, began running the streets, got more involved into the crime and, partying every weekend and that kind of thing. But, with using drugs and selling drugs and you're spending money, I began to look for other ways to make money, and I began breaking into people's houses, cars, all of that. And at 17 and a half years old, me and 3 of my friends ended up committing a robbery, and, I got away, but they ended up getting caught. And later on that night, I was being waken up, with flashlights and police officers taking me out of bed and, taking me in. And, just like I was taught, never said anything, went all the way in there, and I just, I remember when they shut the gate on me, I just asked, officer, how did I get caught? And, they came back and showed me these yellow pieces of papers with my friends, signatures on them, basically turning me in, saying I was the leader in the situation with all that. So at that time is when that mold in my mind, that mentality broke, that the streets, that your friends, your neighborhood people, they would always have your back. And, it broke that mold, and that wasn't true. I realized that people are looking out for themselves, and when their back is against the wall and their neck is on the line, they're going to do whatever they got to do to save themselves. And, I realized that I had hurt, a lot of my own family members because I turned my back on them to be able to live this street life. And, it was all just, kind of like it's like a song or a movie, it's not real. And it broke that mold and mentality that was in my mind. And, I began to look at my life for the first time in a clear perspective to see what avenues that I've taken, how far off of track I have really become. Because when I was a child at 8 years old, I remember, man, that kid had a dream. That kid had a goal. You couldn't tell him that he wasn't going to become a professional athlete. If you went into my room at 8 years old, you see pictures of Michael Jordan and all these famous athletes, and then fast forward to 15, and now it's pictures of, rappers and, marijuana leaves, and you got graffiti tagging all over the walls, things like that, what happened? How'd that kid go from one end to the other, completely off track? Well, I began looking up to the wrong things, and I lost track of what my goals and my dreams were for my life. So sitting in that jail cell is when everything got clear to me, and I realized, look, I'm either looking at spending the next 6 to 9 years in prison, or I began to make a change. And that's exactly what happened. In that jail cell was when I first hit my knees and, kind of cried out to God and begged him for a second chance and made a commitment that if he can get me out of this situation, I would change my life. And that's exactly what happened. And here we are today.
Kenny, one of the, and it's a really powerful message that I think tends to get missed at times when we talk about pro athletes, that people have this perception that everything has just been gifted to them, like you were gifted this athleticism and this talent, but it took hard work and it took dedication. After this this enduring time in your life, what made you decide that you were going to channel all of your energies to continue it in the form of playing basketball? Because, most people are, in hindsight, they can always say, you know what, after everything that I've been through, I'm just fortunate to be at this particular point. But you basically just said, you're going to refocus, you're going to rededicate yourself. And clearly your faith is saying, if you give me an opportunity, give me a chance, I'm going to do this. How did you channel all of that to allow it to be in the form of basketball? Because most athletes don't put themselves back in that situation the second time around. It's usually in other endeavors that they find themselves. And yet you refound yourself again through the game itself.
Yeah, for me, it was as simple as this. I knew I had to change my life, and I had to begin to make positive choices because, out of all the grandchildren in my family, I was the second oldest on my mom's side and on my dad's side. So when my oldest cousin on my mom's side, who I looked up to the most of everyone, he was involved in gangs, he was selling drugs, he walked a certain way, talked a certain way, dressed a certain way. I wanted to be just like him, and he passed away at 19 years old. And my oldest cousin on my dad's side, you know, he passed away from drug overdose. So that made me now the oldest of all the grandchildren, of all the siblings, all my cousins in my family. I'm the oldest now. So I knew I had to make choices that were going to reflect, you know, that leadership. I didn't want them going off, you know, on the wrong path, making the wrong decisions. I didn't want them following into my footsteps. So the choices and decisions I began to make at that point, I was not only doing for myself, but I was doing for my family. I felt like I had to put my family on my back and, you know, endure all the hardship and make those sacrifices, you know, to become successful, to give them a role model, to give them somebody to look up to. And so that's what keeps me passionate. That's what keeps me going. You know, now I've had all of my family graduate from high school, gone on to college. You know, now I'm not just doing it for my family. I'm doing it for my generation. I'm doing it for all the youth that are out there that say, man, I'm, you know, drugs are all around me, gangs are all around me. I'm growing up in this neighborhood or this environment and this or that. Well, you know, if Kenny Dobbs made it out of that situation, then I can too. I'm trying to be an inspiration for a nation, and that's what, you know, my life is all about. That's what keeps me passionate about doing this. So, you know, when you talk about this movie, it's stemming from true life stories. Of course, it's Hollywood. You know, you got directors and writers that, you know, they take bits and pieces and they, you know, put their own flavor and style to it. But, you know, overall, the inspiration, you know, and the storyline is based on that true story. And, you know, for me, once I set my goals and really focused on the vision, that's where I begin to channel all my energy, all my time, you know, and make those sacrifices and take away from chasing girls or using drugs or hanging and partying. You know, you don't see me out in the nightclubs because I'm spending my time investing into the areas of my life that are going to get me closer to my goals and dreams. You know, and so even with the people that I hang out with, you know, I had to evaluate my friends. I had to look at each one of the person that I allowed into my inner circle and say, is this person holding me up and pushing me towards my goals and dreams, or are they dragging me down? And as I evaluated each person, I would say, you know, this dude, he only calls me up because when he wants to smoke and get high, or this girl just hits me because she wants to party or, you know, hang out and all these other things. I'm realizing who's there for me truly out of love to support me and who's there just to, you know, feed off of me and you know, and entertain their own selves, looking at what they can get off of you. So, you know, once I made those cuts, I was able to have my time, and I had to become accountable over my time as well to invest into the right areas. So all of those things have kind of become my secrets, my keys to success. But overall, the number one thing was putting God first in my life. And once that element was in place, you know, I began to move by faith, and everything else just falling in line from there.
So, I mean, you're really spitting that stuff right there, man. This is a message that a lot of people need to hear. And you're going out there being the champion of your own cause and making sure this message gets out. But I guess my question to you really is, when you're going out there and speaking to these youths, because some of the things that you mentioned in terms of, you know, walking with a certain level of swag and, you know, selling drugs, and these are things that gets kind of objectified by some of our youth today. How do you feel, in essence, that your message, being somebody who lived that life at some point, went to jail, got out, and now is, you know, having a movie made about his life, how do you think that message is resonating with some of the people that you get to speak with now?
I mean, I think if anything, it gives them more of an opportunity to see in retrospect, just like, you know, fast forward. It's able to take you back, and it's able to push you forward. Anytime you could look back on your life and see what mistakes you made, and then fast forward and be able to see where things could be if you begin making the positive choices. I think, you know, with this movie, it gives them that opportunity. It shows them the negative side of things on what could happen, but also it shows you the positive on what could happen when you begin to set your goals and chase your dreams. So within this hour and a half of watching this movie, you know, they've kind of taken that roller coaster ride to be able to say, man, you know, things can go negatively or they can go positively. It all depends on what kind of choices I'm prepared to make, you know, for my future today.
Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast with our special guest, Kenny Dobbs, one of the stars, and really the movie centered around him. The movie is called Slamma Jamma, just released this past weekend. I want to pull out an interesting quote because, you know, I read some of some of the release information about the movie, and I found it interesting that Tim Shea, the director and also of River Rain Productions, he basically said that people have said that it's the best basketball movie since White Men Can't Jump, which I think is really a great, admiration to the quality in the film work, and clearly what you and Chris Staples and the rest of the cast have been able to do to really kind of put this movie in the forefront. But I find it interesting because when I think about my generation, and Shaw, he's a part of my generation as well too. I think about a movie like Above the Rim, um, where I think there was a poignant message that had to be provided that you're actually giving in essence that could correlate to what this generation can see. And even though it's not, the high end mainstream type of characters or actors or actresses that were involved in White Men Can't Jump, I think the movie had more of a realness when guys like Tupac and Leon were a part of that. And I'm just curious from you, is that a great correlation too? Do you kind of agree with the sentiment that this movie is as good as something as White Man Can't Jump? Because when I think of Above the Rim, I feel like it's part of that classic, basketball movie that does speak loudly about the message of kids rising above the streets and becoming more than what the streets have made them out to be.
Yeah, I think you're right, 100%. Above the Rim, classic basketball movie. You think of basketball movies, of course, White Man Can't Jump, Above the Rim, He Got Game, all of those kind of movies come to mind. I think with this movie, I think it sets itself apart only because of the aspect that you got real athletes, in this movie. You got some of the best dunkers, from around the world. So with these guys coming out, there's no editing, there's no, the guy goes up to the dunk and then all of a sudden the camera cuts and a different angle comes in. Now he's hanging on the rim. You know what I mean? That was the kind of stuff that I was, as a kid watching on all those different videos and, being able to see like, man, that wasn't real. They just, they edited that piece up, and that kind of disconnects you from the movie on the basketball side of things. Well, this time you've got actual professional dunkers, best dunkers from around the world, coming into the movie, playing these different characters and roles, and, who I believe, man, are great actors. They did an amazing job. Gary Smith, man, killed his role as Craig Jackson. Chris Staples coming in playing that leading character there. Michael Diggs, it was amazing to be able to see these guys transition and go into that. And not just them, we got other celebrity athletes and, YouTube sensations that all make their different appearances. I felt good about it because for me, I was able to see all my friends and people that I've, kind of built relationships with over the years come out to be part of this movie. So you don't get all the, actors playing these roles. These are real life athletes playing the roles of actors who did an amazing job. So, you're going to get that real connection of the game when you're watching the movie. And of course you got guys like, Michael Irvin that came in and played the role of the agent. He did an amazing job. And, the movie itself with the story, it's authentic. It's real. Something that people can relate to, as well as the whole family, can have fun knowing that that faith element is the foundation of all of it. So their kid is going to get an amazing message at the end of the day.
Great stuff there, Kenny. And I got some more follow-up questions here regarding the movie itself. Were you involved, I guess, in terms of the casting decisions? Obviously, the movie is based on things that have happened in your life, and you making an appearance in the movie as yourself. But as you mentioned, Chris Staples is kind of the star of the movie. How much of a role did you have in the casting decision of some of the guys that are going to be appearing in this film?
It was cool, man. Our director, Tim Shea, did an amazing job creating the script. When he first bring me out, I was able to, let him know the people that I felt would be great at it. Obviously, telling him about Gary Smith would be perfect for the role of Craig Jackson, coming out there being kind of like the villain. My relationship with Gary over these years was, Gary was somebody who was a few years younger than me. We met in high school. And I was a big negative influence in his life. Took him out there doing robbery type things and all that kind of stuff. And when I changed my life, Gary was the person that I went back into our neighborhood to find, to pull him out of that lifestyle because of the talent and the potential that I've seen in him. And, you know, I told Gary, meet me at the gym at this time on this day. You know, God's been doing something amazing in my life, and I want to be able to share that with you. Well, out of everybody that I've talked to, you know, Gary was the one that showed up. And that was in 2009. And now fast forward to today, and he's become one of the best athletes in the world. So to be able to, you know, talk with him, get him involved in the movie, look at the other athletes out there, be able to say, who's the best dunkers? Who do we want to get involved? Who would play these good roles? You know, that was something on Tim's end that he had an eye for. That's why, you know, that's why he's producer, writer, director. You know, it's amazing. It's amazing what he was able to do, and the talent that he was able to bring into the movie. Chris Staples, I think, you know, he's done commercials and he's done things in the past, so it was an obvious choice of all the dunkers, you know, to be able to bring somebody in like him that can both, you know, fulfill the role of a leading role, because it's no easy work to do. You know what I mean? Originally, I was going to play myself, you know, being the leading character. But, you know, when you got girls that are coming in and auditioning for their part, and you got to cry and you got to get there with them emotionally, for me, you know, my dad taught me boys don't cry, you know. So when the girl's crying, I'm supposed to start crying, I couldn't help but just start laughing, you know what I mean? So wow. I know that it was no easy job to be able to do, and Chris came in and did an amazing job at that and killed the role of Michael Diggs.
That's what's up, Kenny, man. I think it takes a lot, you know, for your story to be told and you kind of to step back, if you will, to have a more seasoned and trained actor, if you will, play the role that needed to be on the big screen there. A couple more before I let you get out of here, man. So my question is, because if you're a hoop head, right? Slamma Jamma, what I know it to be is, you know, you think about the old Houston Rockets, if you will, that 5 Slamma Jamma thing with Hakeem Olajuwon and things like that. How was the name of this movie created with Slamma Jamma?
Oh yeah, that was all Tim. As far as, you know, like you mentioned, Clyde Drexler, you guys got guys like that, like you know, the whole Slamma Jamma theme from back then, being able to bring that back to life and a term that people were familiar with hearing. So, you know, Slamma Jamma is just something, you know, it flows together. You know, it's something that's going to be able to stick out. And, you know, Tim did a great job picking the title, you know, for the movie and sticking with it. I know he, you know, got a lot of opposition or people saying, oh, you should change it to this or you should make it that. You know, sticking with Slamma Jamma now, you know, people realize, like, okay, it flows together. It's something that people can remember, and it's the theme of the story. So
makes some sense. And the last one before I let you get out of here, my girlfriend would slap me down if I didn't ask. When we saw the trailer, it was one of those things that I guess it was how it was portrayed to her is that all women need to see this movie. What can you give me a little background, a little backstory into that? Why is it something that maybe like all women or maybe all women of color, however it's being presented, need to see, and how it may resonate with people like that?
Oh man, well I mean, you got Tammy, one of the best, you know, street ball women basketball players. She's the star of the Harlem Globetrotters. She comes in, makes her appearances in the movie, plays one of the leading roles as far as being one of Chris's friends in the film, and you know, she takes on some of the boys at the street ball court, you know, letting them know that girls are ballers too, you know, and there's no you know, difference as far as for them not being able to play or, you know, handle themselves in an environment where, you know, it's predominantly dominated by men. You know, these girls nowadays, they got game, you know, they can hang too. You got girls that are dunking the ball now. That's something that's never happened before. So, you know, it was cool to be able to have that element. But overall, like I mentioned, you know, and like your wife was probably mentioning to you, this is a faith and family type of a movie, you know. So you got women that are crying, you got guys that are crying, you know. It you know, the whole crowd. As I looked around in our movie premiere, I think people laughing, I think people crying, I think people cheering, you know. And at the end, which really touched my heart was, you know, being able to get a standing ovation from all of our, you know, people that came out in the city. The theater held, you know, 350 people. So it was a crazy environment and atmosphere. This movie is definitely going to be fun for women, for children, aunts, uncles, grannies, grandpa. Bring the whole family out. You know, it's a faith and family type of movie. It's going to be fun for everybody.
He is the man, Kenny Dobbs. world-renowned slam dunk champion, but more importantly, one of the realest street ballers that you'll ever have an opportunity to see, not only on the big screen, but also in real life. Kenny, just so that we're clear in understanding, the movie premiere happened this weekend, but it has also been released nationwide, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We did the premiere. We actually did the official premiere a few months back at Fox Studios in LA, where we had all the cast and everybody come out, celebrate and hang together, get that sneak preview. But we did our official release just this year, Friday, March 24th, and it released nationally at that point. And so I'm actually heading back out to see it again. We got a whole new group of people that are coming in, reserving the theaters, from churches to boys and girls clubs and all of that stuff, man. This is inspiring youth and families all across the nation. So I'm super excited and blessed to be able to have that opportunity. One more big shout out to Tim Shea, the whole cast, Chris, Gary, everybody that made this thing happen, man. God bless everybody. And thank you guys for having me on the show.
Definitely. Kenny, man, we really appreciate you spending some time breaking down not just the movie, but also breaking down your life and how it correlates this. And it's definitely a must-see movie. I know myself and my co-host, Shaw, we're definitely going to go check it out. Slamma Jamma, reminding audiences in the face of injustice, faith, and determination can help reconcile the past and bring hope to the future. Available nationwide. Definitely check it out. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast, and this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
Devin Booker, remember that name, all but 20 years old. Book it. He dropped 70 against the Boston Celtics. It looks like the Boston Celtics are just a magnet for superstars on the come up to be like lighting them up at the TD Garden, bro.
Well, that was great for him to witness that and to see that even the Boston Garden crowd kind of, cheering his name and all of that, and having the most points scored against the historic Celtics franchise is, a 21-year-old Devin Booker. So that was a great, amazing performance. Definitely the best of this NBA season in terms of points, and definitely one of those guys out there we're going to have to keep our eye out on, man. This guy, he's really something special.
No, what was special was the tweet or the reporting from Bleacher Report. If people check out the Instagram, some of the comments by the Celtics players were pretty... Little hate. Little scathing there. You know what I mean? Isaiah Thomas saying, we're focused on playoffs. They're focused on the lottery. Like, seriously? Like, that's just venom.
Or Watson coming back, like, if you mad, then do something about it. So, I mean, it's, no love lost there, a little bit. And Boston's still salty from losing a game earlier in the year at Phoenix, on a Tyler Ulis, heave at the buzzer. Boston definitely has a little bit of angst towards those Phoenix Suns. And Isaiah specifically, too, because, when Phoenix got rid of him. So,
Of course. But listen, they need to channel that venom to the Eastern Conference. That's what it needs. That's what needs to happen. And don't let dudes like Devin, I'm going to start calling him Devin the Dude, but don't let Devin the Dude drop another 70 on the basketball team. How about they start doing that? All right, Shaw. For the Los Angeles Lakers, something on a good note, because it's been a terrible 2-3 months since the trade deadline for them. Shaquille O'Neal's statue has been raised at the Staples Center. And when I say raised, I'm talking like elevated. You see the statue? I mean, true to form, with Shaquille O'Neal and the O'Neals just all up in somebody's imaginary head as he's rim rocking. I mean, a never before type of statue. Very, very picturesque for the big Aristotle.
Yeah, good for him, man. And definitely, I think the Lakers, they understand what's happening here. He's one of their all-time greats, and to honor him, and then to have Kobe come out there, the bearded Kobe, out there, giving up some of the epithets that he and Shaq used to share, and some of their great stories. And again, it's just honor. It's awesome to see a player like Shaq being honored by a historic franchise like the Lakers.
All right, how about Adam Silver issuing out a memo to all of the NBA teams about resting their players? I guess the whole craziness that took place the last week or so with the Warriors, with the Spurs, with the Cavaliers, didn't take too kindly to Adam Silver. So, he just basically, had to send out, a little bit of a warning to the teams. Stop that resting crap.
Yeah, a little hey yo, you know what I mean? Just, whatever. Our television partners aren't happy that you're resting these guys on these nationally televised games. And there's nothing he can really do about it. He's just strongly encouraging that they notify the league office ahead of time, so maybe they can try to pivot with their TV partners. I don't really know, but I think he's trying to take a step in the right direction, which is something that Adam Silver has continued to do since his tenure as a commissioner of the league. But it's going to be a problem that's going to have some deeper conversation about in the offseason for sure.
Listen, when you have Jalen Rose, when Rachel Nichols on NBA Jump has got to bring out Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Byron Scott to basically call out the modern day NBA players about this resting stuff, makes you feel some kind of way about how superstars are kind of getting the royal treatment when it comes to this resting during the regular season stuff. Finally, Shaw, speaking of resting, it's kind of funny Adam Silver sends it to the teams. I guess he also sent that memo to Joakim Noah that he can rest for the remaining 20 games of the NBA season, violating the drug policy rules. So that's going to carry into effect to the 2017 NBA 2017-2018 NBA season. How about that for Joakim? Talk about adding insult to injury on what has been an absolutely horrific first year as a New York Knick.
Yeah, I think the bigger slap in the face is that under the new collective bargaining agreement, he wouldn't have gotten in trouble for this substance. So it's like under these rules, he gets suspended 20 games. Under the rules that are going to take place on the next CBA, he wouldn't have been nabbed by this thing. So, ironic for Joakim and as you alluded to, just a terrible season for him and the Knicks overall.
Yeah, man. I feel bad for the Knicks. I feel bad for Knicks fans. And I do feel bad for Joakim Noah. He's really and honestly a good dude, but he has definitely not lived up to the contract that he's received this offseason. And hopefully he will get himself back together and kind of resurrect, what has been really a tumultuous and a disappointing season nonetheless. What a hell of a show that we put forth for our listeners. I listen, it feels like we're gaining momentum, kind of like the NBA playoff picture, man. We trying to go out with a bang before we even talk playoff basketball when it comes to the way that we've been setting up these shows these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely right, brother. I think the NBA is like, we're in a track race. They're handing us a baton and we're just trying to run with it. We want to make sure that we bring the real and the great content to our listeners, man. As you said, a great show that we had here today. Again, I hope really people take a deep listen in to what Kenny Dobbs had to say. The message that he's delivering, talking about his faith, talking about going to jail, being on drugs, struggles with his parents and his family, all of those things. I think these are things that can resonate one way or another with whoever you are. And if it's not you specifically, somebody who's gone through some of these struggles. So make sure you take a listen to that. Listen to it twice. You know what I mean? And then tell somebody about it, because this is what we're all about here. We love the NBA, we love basketball, but we love talking about real life and the things that people go through. And that's what's more important. It's life over basketball every time.
Definitely. And I think also, too, and just a little caveat to what you're saying, Shaw, is, I know that we have listeners young and old. If you have family members, if you have a friend, whoever it is that you have that may feel like they need some encouragement, they need somebody that they can look towards who can show them that there's, even in the darkest of times, that there is things positive that can shed a light, that can give you hope, give you encouragement, then I would encourage you to let them take a listen to the interview with Kenny Dobbs, or nothing else, even go check out the website where Kenny Dobbs, Google him up and look at him. He is not afraid to tell you his life story, which a lot of people at times have a tendency to not do. He is not ashamed to talk about the struggles that he has been through and where he is to this particular point, because without that, I don't think it justifies or in his mind, I don't think it allows him to not be able to speak with confidence that it can be done. And so I encourage listeners, to definitely proactively talk to your friends, your family friends, whether they're young and old, that there is something that they can pull from not just this interview, but also a person like a Kenny Dobbs, because I think in some way, shape, or form, we've come across a Kenny Dobbs. We've come across somebody that has found themselves at that crossroads. And some of those people have not been fortunate enough to have the right circle around them to encourage them to come out of that darkness. I know that I've experienced it. My man Shaw has experienced it. I know at some point you guys have experienced it. So definitely take this in, and let's just remind ourselves that while we love talking about this sport, that there is more to the sport. There is life. And that's exactly what Kenny Dobbs was trying to proactively give to us in his message with the interview that we had today. So great stuff all around. Once again, we'd like to thank our man Kenny Dobbs for coming on board with us and talking not just hoops, life, and basketball, but also his movie, Slamma Jamma, once again out nationwide, and we encourage everyone to go check it out. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate each and every single one of you, and we hope that this show gives you a path to a greater week ahead until you jump on board, download, and discuss with us the next time.